Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the specialist digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Now, for long-time listeners, you will probably already know who we are. You may have even heard one of our ads on a previous episode of this podcast. But for those of you who don't, here is a short introduction. At Create Engage, we help you create an effective marketing strategy for your consultancy, a strategy that will resonate with your target clients. And then we support you by delivering the campaigns you need to turn that strategy into a reality, helping you to build your brand, raise your profile with your prospective clients, and ultimately generate return on investment from your marketing activity. Now, I could tell you about many of the great clients that we work with and the results we've delivered for them. But instead, I'm going to do something much more powerful and something that I would recommend you do for your own marketing. I'm going to let our clients do the talking for us. If you are currently thinking about marketing for your consultancy, you're going to want to listen to this.
Create Engage started the process for us. They managed it end to end. They came up with some really creative ideas and we were really happy with the work that they did, which meant that we could just focus on running the business. Not only did we start conversations with clients that we hadn't spoken to before, but also there was tangible return on investment by some work that we were given.
They've helped right from the initial shaping of the idea through to helping us work out what our end goal was. They've supported us with the visual identity and our positioning of the brand.
We've had an immediate expansion of our network and have initiated a raft of new conversations with owners, CEOs in target client organisations, and has led to us winning new projects already.
One of the greatest compliments, I guess, is that one of our competitors even said that they really like what we're doing with marketing and they wish they could be doing something as good.
So from our perspective, we couldn't recommend Create Engage any more than this.
I would certainly recommend Create Engage if you're a consulting firm. They really understand consultancies and the sort of challenges we face. And I don't think you're going to get much better marketing anywhere else.
So I wouldn't hesitate to recommend Create Engage. They did a really good job for us.
So if you're looking for an agency that can help you achieve the results that our clients just described, then head to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can find out more about how we support consulting firms like you. You can download our latest ebook and you can get in touch to talk about how we can help you take your consultancy to the next level through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climbing Consulting. In today's episode, I speak to Chris Gant, managing partner at Wunderman Thompson Consulting. Now, as successful consulting careers go, Chris's has to be up there with the very best of them. Having spent 18 fast-paced years at KPMG, Chris decided he wanted to take some time out, and in 2004, he left to go back to school, taking a sabbatical from his consulting career to join the Sloan program at London Business School. It was his time at LBS, something that we talk a lot about in today's show, that led him then to go on and join EY as a senior partner in their Middle East and Africa business, somewhere that he then spent the best part of the next decade, and something that we talk a lot about, as Chris is the first guest that I've had on the show with extensive Middle Eastern experience. And for anyone listening who's thinking of making that move, there is a lot in today's episode for you. Now, after a successful time with EY, he retired, but found there was only so many rounds of golf he could play. And it was that led Chris to jump back in to consulting in a new and quite different role, this time leading a startup consulting business for Wunderman Thompson, helping them launch and grow their consulting arm within the global brand that they are. In this one, we talk about a whole host of topics and go into detail on some of the things I've just mentioned, including why taking time out of the industry was one of the best career decisions that Chris has made. We talk a lot about consulting in the Middle East, what it's like to work there, and his advice if you're thinking of making the move. And we talk about Chris's latest role, and he shares his experiences of making that jump from a Big Four environment to a consultancy within a creative agency and everything he's learned along the way. If you have started 2023 thinking about your next career move, thinking about what you're going to do, whether you should take some time out, you should go and study, whether you want to move abroad, these are all things that we answer in today's interview. And I know that Chris's advice will be hugely valuable to you. So with the intro over, all that's left to say is please enjoy today's conversation with Chris Gant. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Nick. Delighted to be here today.
Well, and thank you for making the trip on what is one of the last days of 2022 and coming all the way to Bath. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to lunch after. And I think we've got a lot to cover. And to maybe start there for those listening who may have not come across you before, it'd be great if you could give a background on your career and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm one of these people that has been in consulting since, I wouldn't say the origins, but certainly early beginnings in the mid-1980s when I joined what was then Peak Marwick Mitchell, today is known as KPMG. So I got into consulting as a junior assistant analyst back in 1985 at KPMG, at Peak Marwick in London. And really, I went into consulting. I remember my interview, actually. I thought I'd be in consulting for a couple of years. I remember saying this in my interview, they said, how long do you think you'll be here? And I said, well, probably 2 or 3 years, and then I'm going to go back to industry, which was kind of the norm then, right? And here I am, 25 plus years later, still doing consulting. And I suppose for me, it was one of those things that when I got into consulting, I found that I just loved the industry. I loved the variety. I loved the people. I loved the variety, the different work that you do, the travel, the variability of work, actually. And so I ended up staying with it. And so I stayed with KPMG, finally made partner in 1997, stayed then for another 3 or 4 years. And actually that was where there was a bit of a first big change in my career, was that you'll probably remember around, the 2000s, where there was all the backdrop of what was happening in the Big Four, Enron and Arthur Andersen, Accenture. Well, at KPMG, we were part of that. And so the consulting practice got sold to Atos. So I was one of those partners that was sold and went to Atos. I stayed for another 1.5 years, but for me, it was a bit of a change. It wasn't quite what I'd intended at that point. And that was where I took a sabbatical, went to London Business School for a 1.5 years, which was fantastic, actually. I did so many things at London Business School. I'm sure we'll revisit that during the conversation. After that, came out of it, a couple of stints at systems integrators. Finally, after about 6 years of 3 years at Capgemini, 3 years at Logica, I got headhunted by EY to join as an advisory partner, which was like going back to the future. So I was with EY for just under 10 years as a partner, both working internationally and also in the UK, albeit in an international role. And then finally, where I am today, I'm now with an agency, Wunderman Thompson, part of the WPP group, which is a real change for me from a Big Four systems integration background. But honestly, it's been phenomenal, but really enjoying it so far.
Fantastic, Chris. Well, there is a lot of ground for us to cover in there. And after this, I know we've got lunch after, we should compare notes, because funnily enough, I've had quite a few guests who that KPMG selling to Atos was the catalyst for the next stage of their career. And I suspect many of those are your contemporaries. So we'll pick up on that, as I say, afterwards. But I wanted to start today, and you mentioned it there. It's funny, you said you thought you'd been consulting for 3 years, and then 25 years later, here you are. You left KPMG, and that would feel like the obvious time to go back to industry. But you went and had your sabbatical. And I really want to ask about that, because it's something that feels reasonably unusual in our industry. You can tell me whether that's true, but maybe we start there. What led you to take the sabbatical? And can you share for our listeners actually what that sabbatical was?
Yeah, sure. So, well, the sabbatical, I took a year out and I went to London Business School. I joined the Sloan program, which is an MSc for, I guess, more seasoned, experienced professionals. So it's typically something you did around about the age of late 30s, early 40s, rather than typically most business schools, MBAs, they tend to be late 20s, really. So it was probably about 10 years later than most people would typically do that. I took the decision because by that stage, I'd been in consulting for just under 20 years, of which 7 or 8 I'd been a partner. And for me, it just felt like a good time to take time out to reflect, but to do it in an environment that was supportive, that would kind of lead you to taking you through decisions that you wanted to take. And honestly, that was the reason why I did it. And I chose London Business School. I thought it was probably one of the best schools to go to. I think that what I learned there, and this was, I always think with your career, it's easy to discover things with hindsight, right? At the time, you don't realize it. But I realized at KPMG that pretty well throughout my career there, I was deep but narrow in my skill set. I was always the person that would be involved in finance, financial systems work. I ended up doing a lot of work in the banking sector as well with some of the big, banking clients in the city. And I was always that person. And that actually sustained me through from being a junior consultant, senior consultant, manager, director, and eventually partner. I mean, my business case was based on building these large financial systems projects. And I think, when you make partner there in a big four, then they're not just looking for what you do today, but what you're going to do sustainably over a period of time. So I think my track record had suggested that was what I was going to do because I'd done it for many years before. But when I got to London Business School, I kind of realized, wow, there's so many other things that I could do. And London Business School in particular was very, very good at the venture capital, entrepreneurial, private equity side of things, finance. It was very good at strategy and leadership. And I started to explore a lot of different options there. And I always remember one of the classes that I joined, one of the strategy classes, and the professor there, a great guy, I'll mention his name, Marcus Alexander. He was a former consultant at BCG. And I said to Marcus, I want to do a large program, to finish the work here. I'd like to do it for one of the big banks. And can you help me? And something strategic. And he said, well, do you fancy going to work for Barclays? And I thought, Barclays would be fantastic. And I kid you not, within literally a week, I got introduced to then chief exec of Barclays in the UK and did a fantastic project on customer service, customer satisfaction, which was totally different to what I'd done in my KPMG days. And it was probably the sort of project that if I thought back to when I was at KPMG, would have killed for. In terms of doing that, because you had free access to, the board and who were all very keen on customer service as an issue. And that really gave me a change of direction, really, because I suddenly realized that I could do other things and things that I hadn't been trained to do, but actually were things that you could explore if you've got an inquisitive mind that takes you in different directions. So a little bit of a long-winded story there, Nick, but that was why I went to London Business School. It was time to reflect, time to take time out, and time to explore doing other things.
I think it's a really great sort of story. And I love that point around actually the shift and being able to go from narrow but deep. It was at a very different stage in my career, but I remember having the same challenge when I was in consulting of if you want to progress, but you also want to move industry, that can feel quite hard. And just because, again, I don't know a whole lot about the Sloan Fellowship. I've done a little bit of reading ahead of this, but as someone who was part of that course, I guess you mentioned you looked at some abroad, decided to stay in London. What was it that led to that course? Was it the fact it would let you have that freedom to decide what to do next that led you to it? Or was there something else? And I guess I'm asking this for anyone who's listening, maybe thinking, well, why would I do that over a more traditional MBA or I don't know, a PhD or something more traditionally academic, if you like?
Yeah, no, good question. I think the Sloan program had a particular niche. I felt that it was catered for me or people like me, at my stage of career. So, and I said, typically if you were late 20s, early 30s, you probably would have done MBA or, I think at London Business School, they did things like a master's in finance, things like that. So typically younger people. I think there was something about the Sloan program that was done by London Business School and MIT in the US that was just unique, I felt. And it was just what I was looking for. I searched around and, you do your due diligence and that type of thing. But for me, it just seemed to be exactly what I needed. And I think I liked as well. I mean, there's a lot of, it was hard work actually. And I remember, because I hadn't done academic work for years, and suddenly, you're thrust into this course where they're absolutely bombarding you with all sorts of classes and casework. And, I remember the first term was a real struggle to get through it, just through coping with the sheer volume of work. But once you'd got to that level, I suppose you'd reach cruising altitude on the course and you felt more comfortable in the environment that you were in and you started to know the resources that were out there you could use. That was where it became more interesting for me personally, because there were so many things that you could explore outside of what you were, outside just purely the course material. And I think this is what I was really looking for, was something that I could explore things, but in an environment that was supportive.
I find things like this really interesting because in some levels, someone might listen and think, well, it's obvious that you did it in the stage of career you are. But I suspect at any stage in your career, taking a step out of your career and both going back to school and partly you mentioned the study, the different approach, you'd spent however much of your career advising banks, doing, sort of strategy decks. Suddenly you're doing essays. You're probably back in the library, like you say, looking at cases. But also, I guess there's the element of, well, you are physically taking a year or 2 years. It's an 18-month program, wasn't it? Yes. So you're taking, let's say 2 years out of your career. You're not earning for that time. Presumably you're paying for the course. So there's sort of some fundamental principles that hold for anyone within their career. And I guess I'd be really interested in the decision-making process you made. And if it was an easy decision for you, maybe answer this as the advice you give to others now in kind of taking that leap. Because for some people listening, that will feel like a huge leap.
Yeah. It's a good question. I suppose I was lucky in a sense that at that point, I had come from a background where I was a partner at KPMG for a number of years. So financially, I was in a position where I could afford it. But there were some people who were at maybe different stages who decided to make the investment and they thought that was worthwhile. I think in an overall career, whilst shelling out, I don't know what it was for a course. I don't know if I can mention fees on this, but I think I seem to remember the course fees were about £40,000 or something for a year. And then you've got your living costs. But in the context of a career, although it seems a lot of money at that time, actually in the context of a career, it's actually not that much at all. And the platform it gives you as well, I think it just trajects you to the next level in terms of what you can do. I think in terms of why I did it, it really was for me, the financial thing wasn't such a big consideration at that point, but I just felt I needed a break. I needed to break out from what I was doing and just consider, I still felt career-wise, I had another 20 odd years left in my career and I wanted to do something purposeful with that. And I just felt taking time out at London Business School would be a great way of kickstarting the next stage in my career. And I think it was. And yeah, going to London Business School just jolted me to do different things.
No, I think two great pieces in there, Chris. I love, and you're quite right, the kind of the fees, whatever they were and whatever they are now, when you look at the sheer money, you look at that can feel a lot, but actually if you average that over a career and particularly when you get to that sort of partner and that senior level in the industry, that it is a relative drop in the ocean to career length earnings. Like you say, you're going to be in a career for 40, 50. I mean, who knows what the pension age will be when my generation is finished. And actually that there's a subtlety you've alluded to. I'm going to ask it more for clarification, but actually it feels like that course was a pivotal moment in enabling you to make those next 20 years, I guess, exciting for you, but within that happy. Because I think, there's so many people who I think can get trapped in an industry or a vertical. You mentioned you were financial transformation, that wasn't that narrow deep. Eventually you decide, I don't want to be narrow deep here. And actually that next 20 years can look quite bleak if you've got to do that. Whereas to your point, actually that reset, that stock take, let you go broader into different areas, which makes those next 20 years exciting, which I say I've taken from what you've said, but I'm not going to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, it's a great analogy. And look, don't get me wrong, there are some people that stayed there. I still look on LinkedIn and see some of my peers who are retiring, after, 40 years at KPMG or something. And that's great. I take my hat off to them. They obviously had a different, perspective than I did, but I felt this was right for me at that time. So yeah, no, it did make it more exciting. I think actually one other thing I would mention as well, it probably gave me confidence as well to do other things. I think too often when I was at KPMG, I was kind of in the box. This is what Chris does. And, if we have a big opportunity like this at a bank, Chris is the guy. And of course I came out and we did pretty well out of it. But it gave me confidence as well that I could do other things. And I think that's something that's carried with me, ever since. And I've always liked, one of the things, I'm sure we'll get onto this actually later, but I've always liked trying new things. I've always liked doing things that are different, that are innovative, a little bit creative. And that's always been part of my makeup, actually, trying new things. And maybe that came about or was initiated through that period on the Sloan program. Who knows?
Well, we will talk about those. And I do think it's a really key piece. And you mentioned it with the kind of friends and, be that sort of personal friends, be that, business acquaintances and people that you know in a business context, but it can be very easy in any industry or any firm. We've talked about the differences, and we'll talk about it more later, I'm sure, about sort of the difference between the consulting world and the creative world. And actually, if you spend your whole career in one type of world, you meet a lot of people, but there's a distribution, obviously, but they'll be within a certain worldview, etc. Whereas actually, university is a great leveler. Anyone who's been to university knows that you're thrown in with loads of people, and it doesn't sound like the goal was to buy a network, but you are expanding your worldview, the people you know, the perspectives as well, which I guess is a really big addition to it too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I would say one thing that was, I focused very much on the positive side, and it was all great and it was well worthwhile investment, and I think I genuinely believe that. Equally, there were some things that changed there that I struggled with when I came out. So if I remember, when I was at KPMG again, I'd been there for quite a period of time, and my career was well set out. So it was the next promotion, it was the next bonus, it was making partner, et cetera, et cetera. Coming out of London Business School, I didn't have that map. I suddenly had a lot of opportunities, but my radar of making decisions wasn't what it perhaps should be. And I looked at so many things, some of which I recognize now were probably blind alleys, but I went down those alleys and spent a lot of time, and then probably wish I hadn't later. But so, I ended up looking at entrepreneurial ventures. I started looking at, obviously, consulting. I looked at a strategy firm. I looked at Capgemini. I looked at Big Four. I looked at joining a recruitment firm. They were keen to hire me for some reason, a recruitment firm. And I spent so much time on these different avenues that at some point I thought, well, Chris, you've got to do something. You can't keep looking for that kind of nirvana, that thing that is going to be really the thing that, to just get on and do something. And I recognize that now, again, with hindsight, that going to London Business School and coming out of Sloan, my decision-making radar wasn't what it was at KP, where the plan was just so mapped out for you many years ahead. Suddenly I had lots of options, but choosing the right option was the key thing. And that's not always an easy thing to do.
No, I think you're right, Chris. It's funny because, again, I left consulting much earlier than you did then. But I do think, and I know I struggled with that, the beauty of a consulting career path is it is not easy, but it is simple. If you achieve certain things, every 2 to 3 years, you'll have a promotion, and you do well enough and you eventually become a partner, and then you get more promotions. But coming out into a world which doesn't have such a linear career path creates, like you say, it's the paradox of choice, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And I think that was just part of the journey I was going through. And again, I recognize the hindsight, but and I still wonder now, did I make the right choice or whatever? But you make a choice and you move on.
How did you decide? Just to close this bit off, what led you to say, no, right, I know where I'm going next?
It's a tough one, this, because often with a career, you like to present a sort of, meteoric rise that goes up. I think basically I had a couple of offers. One was with a big consulting firm in the UK. Another one was with a Big Four accounting firm. And I remember sitting in my bedroom one night reading the contract and, God, I don't want to do this. It's kind of ironic later on because I did go back to that. But I think I almost ran out of time, actually. I realized I'd burnt best part of a year looking at all these different options. And I was talking to my wife and said, well, I just need to do something now. It might not be the perfection, but it's a good opportunity and I'm going to do it. So honestly, that was it. I'm not sure I made the perfect decision, but I had so many options and I felt I had to choose something that I felt comfortable with, that was going to take me forward and actually would leverage the stuff that I'd learnt over the recent years at London Business School and even before that, actually. So, yeah, I can't say it was some great design what happened. I wish I could, but I can't. I know some people say that. But for me, it was a case of I burnt quite a few months looking at different options and just decided, look, just go with it. Go with what you think is the best one. And that's what I did.
Well, sometimes that lack of time is what you need to make a decision. And like you say, the good is good enough to figure out, if we always search for perfect as consultants, as we as an archetype often do, that paralysis of choice comes in. And I'm keen to move forward to, I guess, you mentioned it wasn't the next step for you, but a couple of steps on, and that's EY. And again, another thing that I think you may well be the first, and I say this in sort of, forgive me if for any other guests listening, I've misremembered, but I think you are my first guest who spent time out in the Middle East. So I've had guests who've been in Asia, guests who've been in America, but never actually a guest from the Middle East. So I'd love to talk a bit about your time working. Well, start where is best to start. But if we sort of take your journey with EY, and maybe we kick off with sort of what led you out to Bahrain? How did you find yourself there?
Yeah, it's a great story, actually. I think going back in my career at KPMG, I actually had worked in the Middle East when I was out there. So I'd worked in Qatar, I'd worked in Abu Dhabi, I'd worked in Dubai. So I spent quite a bit of time there. In fact, I always remember going back to when I joined KPMG. I was rather, when I was applying to be a junior analyst or something, I rather naively said to one of the partners interviewing me, said, well, how quickly am I going to be able to travel? And they said, well, they looked at me, smiled and said, well, about 6 months. And lo and behold, it was 6 months. So after 6 months, I went out, my suitcases, and lived in Qatar for the next year and a half, which was phenomenal that time. And nothing like, you just had the World Cup in Qatar. And I can assure you Qatar in 1986, 87 was a very different place to what it is today. So when the opportunity came up later on, I was working with Logica at the time, running the financial services business for Logica. And an opportunity came up to join EY as a direct entry partner. And I thought, well, that could be quite interesting, because I did kind of feel that my background, I was in an SI firm, but actually doing consulting was where my heart was at. And so EY approached me, so we've got a great opportunity for you. Come out to the Middle East. We need somebody to run financial services technology for us. You'd be great, whatever. So I went through the whole process, and that's why I went out to the Middle East. I think I was ready at that point as well, because I'd had, after London Business School, I'd done another 6 years at SIs, and I just wanted something different. I was looking for something different, and I certainly wasn't afraid of going to the Middle East, having been there before, and I felt comfortable within that. So yeah, I went out there into Bahrain, and that was a big next step in my career, but one that I felt I was ready for at that time. And also, probably one thing I would say is that going back to my KPMG days, when I made partner, it was a big thing. Now, making partner in any of these firms is a big thing, and I remember today, where I was, where I took a phone call where, the senior partner comes on and said, Chris, I'm going to make you a partner. Congratulations. And, you're walking on air for a while. I remember that, but you're learning how to be a partner there. You've always had in those sort of firms somebody above you who is a partner who's guiding you. So suddenly when you are a partner, you have to go through a whole new learning process of what that is. When I joined EY, I'd been a partner before and an exec in other places before. So I wasn't learning that. I knew what it was to be a partner. So that made me quite effective straight away, because I didn't have to learn the ropes of what becoming a new partner was. But yeah, it was an interesting move, and I really enjoyed my time at EY in MENA. It was a great experience, actually. I would recommend it to anybody going out to that part of the world.
Well, you've taken one of my questions just there, so I'll hold it and I will ask it shortly. And maybe to start with, because you mentioned, that step up from director to partner is a big shift. You did that at KPMG. You just said that kind of move across. In some ways, you'd known what being a partner was like. And I was going to ask about what the Middle Eastern business culture is like for anyone listening thinking of going. But maybe I'll ask a different question and we'll let you answer both. Of you had been an exec and a sort of partner in London-based firms, so UK largely, and European Western world culture. You were obviously going in to lead a team and an area, a division in MENA. What is that culture like? And was there at all a shift in going from senior leadership over here to senior leadership over there, where I imagine the cultures, the business practices, etc., are quite different?
Yeah, it was a big shift, actually. And I would say that going back to my time when I was based in London, I actually did a lot of international work. So although London was my home and where my office was, I worked right across the world. So I worked in the Netherlands, I worked in Switzerland, Germany, the US, some bits of work in the Middle East as well, although not so much my later years at KPMG, to tell you the truth, or Logica or Capgemini. But I was probably more of an internationalist anyway. I wasn't somebody that just solely did work in London. I'd moved around quite a lot. I think culturally, yeah, it was a big shift. The first thing that you probably recognize when you join a firm out there, if you're EY in London or whatever, you're one of many people that look like you, act like you, educated like you, whatever. You go out to the middle and suddenly you're in a totally different mix of cultural, ethnic, language backgrounds, where you're actually the minority, not the majority. And that's a big change, actually. But I actually found that getting on with, people in that part of the world, and it was a real melting pot of different cultures and backgrounds and ethnicity. But I actually really enjoyed that. And, during my time there, it was something that, how do I translate what I knew in the UK to there? I think often it's just being yourself and being relaxed. Equally, there are a few people that, did go out there that it didn't work out for as well. And that's probably something we could talk about, because it's not for everybody. And for me, it was brilliant. I was just, in clover out there. It was a great environment. It was growing business. I suppose, in terms of helping people listening to this, in terms of what is different out there, so what is harder out there. I say there's a number of things that you have to be considerate about. I think certainly trying to be patient, trying to be, understand people, try to really understand the processes they go through. I did find that sometimes, decision making out there was slower than I'd been used to. And the worst thing that you can do, either in business or in private life out there, is start to become frustrated. So I think patience, calmness, being considered, being genuine, these are the things that go down well in that part of the world. But I have to say, there were a few people that we brought out, and a couple I brought out, who I thought were going to be great out there. They didn't, for one reason after another. I think often it was their other half that they came out with their partner or wife or something, and that didn't work out for whatever reason. And it was that sort of lifestyle that you had. You really moved around a lot for different places. But for some people, that can be a challenge as well, if they're away from home a lot. And I think this is true in consulting generally, not just out in EMEIA, but that was definitely the travel and the just moving around. I just love that. But even now, I'm still in good contact with, many people out there. Anyway, fond memories of the place, and it was a great period for me.
Fantastic. Well, and I think lots in there to explore. And maybe to start with, you mentioned how it worked for you, and I've made a note of that because I'm going to come back to it. But particularly, like you were sort of teeing us up for people listening, you alluded to where for some colleagues, and this is not to name names, but more around traits, for it didn't work out. And the partner one, I think, is actually quite an interesting one. I don't think people always consider, like you say, if you're going with a spouse and whether they are working or aren't, you both need to want to move. But almost with thinking about within that work context, what were some of the things that you found, I guess, either tripped up colleagues, made you want to send them back, or just took people a long time to adapt to? You mentioned frustration and decision making, but were there any others that you just think those really were the commonalities that people sometimes got wrong or needed to work on? Yeah,
there were a few things. I think certainly, the partner side was a big part, because often if you were coming out to the region, then what would happen to your other half? If he or she was working, what would happen then? How easily could they get another job or not, as the case may be? Equally, if your other half wasn't working, then what they were going to do all this time that you were away, doing wonderful things, traveling around the region, they were going to be stuck in Bahrain or Dubai. And so how were they going to build their network, and how were they going to, enjoy their life? And what I did find some people is where they maybe had very set friends, circles of friends, either in Guildford or Edinburgh or something like that, and a strong family network as well, where, I found these things often were dry, and people missed that. People missed the fact they couldn't go round and, mix with families, meet family every month, or they couldn't go to some local friendships party, every few months or every few weeks, and I don't think it was necessarily the work. I think the work people adapted to, but I think it was the family side. So anybody going out there, I would say, do consider that, because maybe your other half will find it difficult, and then it's all very problematic because you've given up your career and life in the UK, you've gone out there and you've got to go back. But honestly, Nick, I would say it was only a handful of people that happened to. Most people, really adapted well to it, and for those people where their partners found another job, they found a job. Maybe it wasn't exactly what they wanted, but they found a job, and that helped a lot. So, I wouldn't want to, analyze it. But for me, the big thing was always the other, your partner, wife, or whatever, your other half, and how that was going to work out. And I think that's probably the main driver of whether it's going to work out or not. You've got to be happy as a family, and that's really important.
And I guess another angle, and I'm conscious here in asking this question, I'm almost asking you to speak for an entire region as their tourist board. So I'll let you take this as you can. But you mentioned, obviously, you worked across the region. And I think, to your point, the Middle East as a region has changed dramatically. I mean, even the last 5 years, you mentioned Qatar, Dubai has changed a lot. All of these places have changed, and firms like EY have offices in all of them. And so, interested in this, if this isn't interesting, stop me. But if someone is thinking, I want to go out to the Middle East, actually within that Middle Eastern culture, are there different traits or sort of different elements of those specific countries that someone might want to think about? Why go to Bahrain over Oman, over the Emirates, for instance?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's even changed a lot over the last 5 years. I mean, just had the World Cup on TV in Qatar, and people got a feel for what Qatar is like. I think that the differences between the different countries have narrowed over the years. So it's no longer such a big difference to go to live in Bahrain versus Qatar, or Qatar, even in Saudi, which is the biggest market. I mean, if you're going to work in the Gulf, in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia is the largest market. In fact, if you put Saudi Arabia and UAE together, I don't know what the latest figures are, but it's probably like 70-80% of the market, right? So if you're going to work in the region, you'll probably end up working there. Qatar probably as well would be the third one. So, when I first went out there, there was this big stigma about going to live in Saudi or Riyadh, and, restrictive. I found that over time that has changed. I mean, even in my 10 years working in the region, Saudi's changed, absolutely immensely. You wouldn't even recognize it from the country that I first went to back in 2012 to today. And I think that trajectory of change is just going onwards. You've seen some of the big entertainment and tourism attractions that Saudi is building, some of the sporting events that now go on there. I mean, even 10 years ago, that didn't happen. It's happened recently. So I think that, choice of where to go is maybe less of an issue, dare I say, today than it might have been as near as 10 years ago. For me, the big business commerce places are Saudi. If it's commerce and industry, then probably Riyadh. Jeddah is more of a traditional commerce type place, trading. You then got the northern region for oil and Aramco and energy. Honestly, if anybody's considering it, I would just say go for it. You won't regret it. It's a great region to be in, a very vibrant region, a lot going on. I found as a consultant, you probably got thrown into situations that you would learn more than traditionally in the UK. You'd be, because you didn't have such a big Cape team, you'd be thrown into engagements or positions where you would learn quickly. And I really thrived on that, actually, and I know a lot of people do. So, if anybody's considering it, then, you might have a few doubts, but honestly, I'm sure you won't regret it. It would be a great experience. And the people that don't enjoy it out there are relatively few, in my experience.
No, that I think a great recommendation for, and particularly given the amount of time you spent out there, and you've actually answered my next question, Chris. So I won't ask it, but just
sorry about that.
Well, no, it's I like it when people do my job for me. It makes it easy. I was going to ask about, actually, is there a distinction between those who are sort of progressing towards partner and those who are partners? And I think what you've just said is actually at all levels the exposure can be greater than in, say, London, where there's lots of people. You might get a smaller role, whereas if you are one of a team of 10, you'll have a bigger role in a Middle Eastern project. There's no good place to ask this, but I realize I should have asked it earlier, so I'm going to ask you it because I will kick myself if I don't. You mentioned you spend a lot of time, you've spent your career traveling, you've worked in all these different countries. In financial services, you can do that. You also can create a perfectly successful career in London and never have to leave the UK. And because I wanted to know, what led you? Why were you so keen to have that international exposure?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, look, it's a difficult question. I think from the very, going back to when I started work at Peat Marwick Mitchell in Puddle Dock all those years ago, I always wanted to travel. It was always something important to me. Maybe there's something in my background as well as a person that comes out there. I found out later in life more about my background. I was adopted and traveled. My parents were from the US and whatever. So, I found, maybe there's something in me that wants to travel. And I would never knock anybody who career in London, great clients, honestly, but it just wasn't for me. And I wanted to travel around the world, and I did, so, and certainly with EY, I did a lot of traveling in the Middle East, but also to India, to Africa, different parts of Africa, actually, I worked in. The US was always part of the mix. So, I don't know. I can only say it's me. I would never say one is better than the other, but for me, that was what I wanted to do, and so be it. Really, I can't answer it any more honestly than that. Really,
I think that has answered the question I wanted to answer, and I think a perfectly good answer in that, and in a nice way, shows you can do that with a consulting career if that's what you want. And I guess last question on sort of this chapter and that kind of international experience. And I'm asking this probably for the people coming back from the Middle East, but could be anywhere, because you were out there for 10 years, I think, was it? 10,
yeah, 9.5, yeah.
Which is a substantial part of your career. You had a huge network. You were working with, like you mentioned the likes of Aramco, industries and companies that are very Middle Eastern centric. And I'd be interested, that move back to the UK. Not everyone, but most people do it at some point. And I imagine there's a bit of trepidation because you've built and cultivated a decade-long network over there. You're coming back to a country where, at best people will have got promoted, but may have, passage of time, you haven't spoken to them for a decade. Some will have retired, some will have moved on. I guess, actually, what was that like for you? And did you have any concerns sort of coming back to the UK? Will I have a network? Will I be able to go and meet people? Just interested how that was for you.
No, it's a great question. And I do know people that when they've been out to that part of the world, overseas for any period of time, readjusting to going back. It's almost like the opposite of what I said of people going out there in the first place. They've got to then readjust to going back. And that can be quite a big impact both on business and personal life. I was probably quite lucky in a way in that whilst I was based out in MENA, I got a new role in EY, which, although I was still living in Bahrain for some of that time, it was actually covering the EMEIA region. So I was getting to the stage where I was thinking, well, I'm probably coming to the end of my time in EY. What am I going to do? whatever. And I was talking to a good friend of mine, Tom Valemer, actually a partner in EY in Dubai, one morning, I think it was. And he said, well, we've got this great role in EMEIA, alliances. Do you fancy coming and working with me? And I said, well, Tom, that'd be great, actually. We've always gotten well together, and let's explore that. So we did. But what it meant was that my role kind of changed away from purely the Middle East region to Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa. So that was a big change, actually. And so for me, it was more of a gentle reintroduction to the UK in this case, based on a new role that I had in EY. So, and actually one thing I would say about the time at EY, and it was one of my fears of going out to the Middle East way back in 2012. One of my worries was that when I went out there to Bahrain, it was going to be Chris Gant on his own, no support, doing whatever he could, but, isolated, basically. And I found within EY, and I'm sure this is true in many of the big four and big consulting firms these days, but EY was very well networked. So if it was financial services, there was a global network. If it was technology, there was a global network. If it was financial management, there was a global network. So I found that it was quite easy to connect with other areas of expertise outside of the region. And if the opportunity was interesting enough, big enough, and warranted support, typically you would find people quite easily would join you and want to work with you, So that was quite interesting. So going back to your question about becoming reacquainted with the UK, I was already part of some of these networks. And so going back to the UK, I was already part of a technology network or financial services network. And so the people that you dealt with were the same as I'd been dealing with when I was based in the Middle East. Actually, all the consulting network in general, it was the same. So for me, I probably had it easier than some in that the role changed, even though I still stayed in MENA for about my first year before I moved back to the UK. I think the challenge for me, and I think most people, is more on the client side, because whilst EY was a global firm and you still had the same connections regardless of wherever you were, actually working with clients in the UK you hadn't worked with for a while could be more challenging. And actually, for me, that was more trying to rebuild the network rather than, having a ready-made network of clients that I could go to. Because as you rightly say, Nick, I'd been out of that market for quite some time. And that applies as well, not only to clients, but also your ecosystem, headhunters, people who know you, looking around, you've got to rebuild that. And that can be a challenge for many. So I wouldn't say it was necessarily easy. I think the transition of role in EY helped me for sure. But yeah, it's not necessarily an easy thing. And I think the challenge for me was more on the client side rather than within EY. But again, I think within a company like EY, you're not out there pioneering on your own. The firm has a, network of clients and client teams. So actually joining up with those is not necessarily such a big challenge as it might be on a smaller firm.
No, I think some really useful points there, Chris. And maybe I'll ask the advice you give to others, but feel free to bring your own story in, because I'm sure this is a question you get a lot from colleagues coming back. Actually, you touched on their clients, you touched on their ecosystem. Almost, how do you advise people to do that, to help them build that network, I guess, in a way that works for them, works for the people they're dealing with? And I guess implicit within that is also recalibrate. If you've been out, you mentioned decision-making, for instance. If you've been out in the Middle East working in a certain culture for 10 years, it can probably feel quite a shift to come back to London, which, I'm being really, this is a real caricature, but it's a bit faster, a bit more hard edge. Like, what advice do you give, if anyone's listening to this thinking, I'm coming back, what should they be doing to do that in a way that works for them and helps them get that grounding again?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure there's a, simple answer to that, actually. I can tell you what works for me. Happy to share that. So I do think throughout your career, you've always got to be thinking of reinventing yourself a bit. So whilst you were known for one thing in a certain place, actually, you now want to be known for something different in a different place, right? So I think always looking at reinventing yourself a little bit, which you can do in various ways, whether it's LinkedIn or how you position yourself in, either speaking events or articles you write. So, and of course, if I think back to my career, that's what I did when I was at London Business School. It was kind of reinventing myself to do something different. And so I was kind of conscious coming back to London. I had to reinvent myself from what I was. But you're quite right. If you go to talk to people in the UK and you're talking about clients that are not in that region, then that can be a credibility challenge, right? So I think you've got to, look at always reinventing yourself and your profiling. I think also working hard on the networking. I mean, I don't think there's any other way of doing it. You just got to kind of keep working at that. I think tools like LinkedIn are great like that these days. You can connect with anybody, anywhere, instantly, right? Which is not something you'd have had 10, 15 years ago. But I think I hardly know anybody that's not on LinkedIn now. Everybody's on LinkedIn. So in fact, I find my current job, the moment you're talking to somebody, a client, the first thing they will do is go on LinkedIn. And there you are. You can find everything you want about the person you're talking to instantly. So I think working on your networking as well is so important. I think how you're profiled on things like LinkedIn, how you can contribute with articles and news items and things like that. But honestly, I don't think there's an easy way of doing it. I think you've just got to work at it, really. And over a period of time, it becomes easier because you become adapting to your new situation. But I struggle with that a little bit. I can only say what I did myself, really. And I think it was a combination of hard work, reinventing myself a little bit, and constant networking.
Well, I think some good tenets there, and that reinvention, like you say, it's always been part of consulting. You'd think it just moves quicker now. What partners or what consulting firms worked on 20 years ago is different to 10, different to 5. And like you say, it's then just applying those to yourself. And I think quite a nice segue, actually, Chris, you've teed me up, so I'm going to jump on it. The reinvention takes us nicely to what you're doing now. And so maybe I'll let you start. Tell us the story of, the role at Wunderman Thompson and how it came about.
Yeah, sure. Well, I retired from EY at the end of December 21. So, and that was no agenda around that. It was just you reach a certain point in your career and you retire, and that's it. I did think, well, what am I going to do now? Should I go and play golf? Actually, one of the big things, I played chess. I should mention that, but I'm a reasonable chess player. So I thought, should I go on the seniors chess tour or something?
So we're talking very, not just play on your phone play, as in play proper.
I've played since I was since I was a schoolboy, actually. So through various levels and that type of thing. So I'm still in the chess. I actually got out of it for about 20 years when my career was taking off in the 90s. And then I got back into it around 2010 when I actually, long story, but I was down the RAC club at a chess circle and they got me back into it. So I still play today. So I forgot I got onto chess. Actually, I have to bring that somewhere. We
were talking about your new role. I'm going to hold back asking about chess. I might ask you about chess at lunch, but you were talking about it was golf, it was chess, and then
So I thought, well, honestly, Nick, I thought this was like January time. Honestly, I'm not ready for this. I'm too young, at least at heart. I still feel I'm hungry enough to do things. So I'm not without ambition still. So I thought, well, why don't I just put a few feelers out? I decided that I didn't want to work in a Big Four environment. I did want to change, and actually that was the right thing for me at that point. I looked around. It was one of the top strategy firms. I was joined one of the top strategy firms because they were looking for somebody like me to help them build their technology business, which, it's quite interesting what's happening in consulting these days. The guys who are, the strategy firms are all building things that are to do with implementation, and the people that are doing implementation are trying to do strategy, and they'll probably all meet in the middle. But then I came across Wunderman Thompson, and it came out of the blue. Really, through LinkedIn, there's a connection. Are you interested in? I thought, well, sounds agency, a bit of an alien world, I thought I'd throw my hat into the ring and explored it. And I think one of the things I've really enjoyed throughout my career has always been building businesses. I've enjoyed the rounded sense of consulting. So doing sales, doing delivery, bringing in new talent, nurturing talent, the kind of operational side of it, making sure you're making money out of it, which at the end of the day is kind of things you need to do. And here came an opportunity to build a consulting business within an agency, which for me was a very alien world. But I thought, well, that's kind of quite interesting. I always quite liked creative and innovation. And at the end of the day, creativity is the DNA in an agency. And I'll come into that later on. But, a very different environment, different types of people. But ultimately, what we are trying to do is build a business transformation capability that would align with the rest of what the agency does, and it's surprising these days, actually, that in an agency, as I've now come to discover, that it isn't all about advertising. We do a lot of work around data, technology, e-commerce, and consulting. In fact, I think we make probably as much money, if not more money, out of data and technology than we do out of traditional advertising these days. So the agency model has changed as well. But where we feel we need a business consulting capability is something that kind of knit a lot of these capabilities together. So through a number of discussions, a very easy discussion, actually. I mean, sometimes I find when you go for interviews, which is what I was doing, you either fit or you don't. And often it's down to the person that you're speaking to. And it was a very easy fit. And I decided, I'm going to do this. Of course, I had to think about how long am I going to do it for? And that's something that will come up at this stage, because clearly I'm not going to be doing this in 10 years' time. I'll say that now. We might have an interview again in 10 years' time and I'll still be doing it. But that's not my intention anyway. But I still feel I could do something for the next 3 to 5 years and build something. And I thought, that could be really, really, really great. And that's how I ended up with Wunderman Thompson. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, a great story. And as I say, I'm going to save the hobbies for our lunch later. And you mentioned there, and I'd be really interested. I know you've been in the role about 9 months now.
Just over 9 months.
Over 9 months. So you've got your proverbial feet under the table. You've got a good feel for the organization. And I'd love to know how that transition's been. You mentioned you love building businesses, that sort of thing that really gets you out of bed and gets you excited. I guess in moving to Wunderman Thompson, you've moved firm size. So while Wunderman is big. It's part of WP, which is even bigger. You are in a startup in effect, and you are in a creative agency. So that's two quite big shifts. And forgive me, anyone from a Big Four environment listening, because they might argue with this, but I think that's quite a fundamental shift. And you've done that at a time in your career where you've spent almost all your career in a big agency, a big consultancy. How has that shift been, and how have you adapted?
Yeah, it has been a major shift. I mean, for a number of different levels, right? In fact, I just pinged a note to Mark Reed, a global chief executive with WPP, a few days ago, and I said, look, end of year, here's a few thoughts. Generally, some great things. I think on the people side, people have been so open, welcoming, keen to learn what I've done, and likewise, on my side. And it's great, actually. You did mention kind of scale up, startup, but actually doing that in an environment where we've already got great clients is so much easier. We work with all the top clients I used to work with at other places, and that means that we've already got entrees and conversations going on where it's easier to jump in. If we were going out there on our own as a pure startup without that, then that'd be much more difficult. Equally, there's a lot of new things. I mean, some of the language terminology is different. We talk about brands, we talk about categories. I mean, when I was at EY, I don't remember talking about that very much at all, actually. But here, it's the big thing, creativity. And when we say creativity, we really mean it. I mean, the heartbeat of the company is creativity. And the one thing that really people get really excited about, there's a big advertising industry event at Cannes every year called Cannes Lions. And, if you win an award at Cannes Lions, it's like winning Oscars for the advertising industry. And people, really go all out for this type of thing. So recognizing the culture is different. That's very different to the Big Four. And that took me a little bit of time to understand marketing. Marketing, it's like, okay, when I was at EY, we did marketing. But this is all about marketing, communications, and customer, right? So, but again, I've always been adaptable, and I've learned. I've been willing to learn and listen and whatever, and that has been a key part of it as well. I think there's a lot of good things though that you can bring from a Big Four environment or big consulting firm to an agency. I think things like how Big Four approach solving problems and how they build implementation plans and transformation plans, that's something that we do, but I don't think as well as the Big Four do. So, and that's one of the reasons I'm there, is that we're trying to build and enhance that capability we have. Equally, we bring creativity to problem solving and bring things to life. And, I remember a client I was working with recently who, the chief executive had approached us, say, it was an industrial services company, big global company. And so we spend a lot of marketing, but I'm not really sure we're effective, and could we improve? Could you help us just do an assessment of what we do today? But what we're really interested in is inspiration. You're one of the world's largest marketing communications companies. Show us what good looks like, and show us what other companies are doing so we can learn from that. And we had this huge workshop with the board I think it was in Madrid actually, and we ran this kind of workshop where they are today in inspiration. And we got to the inspiration bit. And this was just so different to what I've done in the past. So we showed them examples of what other companies have done to project their brand or their image of what they wanted to be represented by. And it was, in companies, software companies that had gone away from we sell software to how that impacted people's lives and the imagery around that. And honestly, in this board presentation, you could have dropped a pin and heard it, because people were just spellbound by this. And and this is what you can do with creative. You can play on the emotion and just the innovation around it. And I love that. So for me, I think whilst there's quite a few things we can still learn from Big Four, strategy consultants, etc., there's a lot of things that we do well as well. And I think where clients want to combine both the strategy consulting alongside delivery, particularly around marketing, communications, that's where we excel. And then the whole delivery side around advertising, content, productionization of that, e-commerce, even things like customer experience. I mean, that's, again, a huge area where we bring innovation and creativity to, often linked to things like digital and websites and things like that. So I think I'm not saying that we do everything, There are some things that clearly we don't do. Like you wouldn't come to us for a finance transformation job or probably a supply chain rationalization. You wouldn't come to us for that. But if you're coming for us around marketing, communications, customer, that's where we excel. And so for me, yeah, it's been great. And it's quite interesting, some of the people that join us as well. I come from Big Four, and actually I found the conversation with people coming from more traditional consulting backgrounds actually quite a conducive one. And what I found actually interviewing younger people, I said, well, you've been at Big Four firm for 5 or 6 years. You're probably going to be a partner in 5 years. And, why don't you just keep on that track? Oh, no. I found that people don't look so long term. I mean, the fact that you can be a partner in 10, 12 years is not typically on the horizon for many people. They want something more instant and now. And actually, what we do sounds really, really interesting. And being part of a startup as well, going back to one of my earlier comments around working in the Middle East, we can give people far more responsibility and challenges than you would ever get because we're smaller and we're a startup. So you have to do your hands on the things. I was joking to somebody yesterday, I was writing CVs for people to put into a proposal. I said, when I was at EY, I used to be the boss of the person that used to write CVs, but now I'm doing it myself. And I think that's the mindset you have to bring to it. I mean, if you're the sort of person that actually got a little bit standoffish from that, and that's all a bit too much, and actually that's something I used to do 25 years ago, I'm not doing it now. Well, forget it. You're not going to enjoy that. You'll last 5 minutes, you'll be out. But if you are up for that, and you're up for that change, and I love working with some of the, we've got some great younger people as well. And they come from a variety of backgrounds. Some of them come from a McKinsey or a BCG or Deloitte or whatever. And they're really lively, bright people. They don't have the experience, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build that experience as we go forward. So for me, it's a bit of a ramble, I guess, what I've just said there, Nick, but I'm really, really enjoying it. I think I love the culture, the agency. I feel I fit in. I like the creativity pieces. I think people sometimes when I go to meetings with people, I go in, introduce myself, and people are all very, very gracious. Oh, welcome here. Great to see you, Chris. But they're probably sitting there, what the hell does this guy do? He used to be a senior partner at Big Four, but what does he really do? Because he doesn't do advertising. He doesn't do this. And you kind of go through that learning experience. But I have to say, so far, it's been great. And I feel at home in this culture. Even after a relatively short period of time, I feel at home in this culture.
Amazing. Well, I think really, really positive and great to hear, and lots for us to cover. We'll see how much we can cover on the interviews, because I think your point around actually that intersection of marketing with technology, with data, and a lot of that comes into consulting. You said earlier, the strat houses are building implementations building strat. I think you're also seeing, particularly the likes of Accenture, and I know some of the other Big Four are following, buying up that creative or building that creative capacity, because actually with the world getting more complex, there is an intersection, but the kind of distinction is a lot less clear. If you are trying to improve customer acquisition, you mentioned, your customer service piece right at the start. Do you do that through a slicker system? Do you do that through better marketing? Do you do that through a better experience? Where does experience stop and marketing end, or start? These are all questions I guess you're now trying to answer.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And by the way, you're very much aware of Accenture Song. I would never, throughout my career, I would never underestimate Accenture. A very slick company, and they have great capability, right? So I would never, underestimate Accenture. I think, at the end of the day, it's kind of, let me take it down a slightly different track, who we compete against, right? Which is probably some the line you've gone. I mean, I was shocked, right? I when I was going through the interview, I said, well, give me an example of some work that you had done. And how did we win that work? And who did we compete against? And I won't mention the client's name, but, it was a well-known, manufacturing brand. And they wanted, a piece of work done around customer satisfaction, loyalty, how they could develop, their membership approach and so on. And they said, well, we beat this against, we won this against 2 or 3 strategy firms. And I said, well, how the hell did we do that? I mean, we're a small startup. And they said, well, it's quite interesting these days with strategy that, there are some engagements where doing, your formal report and having a beautifully packaged deliverable, putting it on the desk is what's required. But actually what we found these days is that clients are looking for something more practical, something they can actually use, something that's tangible, that they can experiment with. That's the buzzword at the moment, is experimentation in marketing, right? Everybody's doing experimentation. And actually that fits with us, because that's kind of what we do. We're a young guerrilla team. We come in and we bring good ideas. We've got people from great backgrounds, but actually we bring that kind of energy and innovation and creativity. And we can actually, in this case, we said, well, not only will we do a report showing you what the strategy should be, we will actually do some mock-ups of what the app will be, what it will look like, and we'll bring in people that can design the app, and we'll do that as part of the engagement. And the clients loved that, because they felt there was something tangible coming from it. So I was amazed, actually, that we compete against the top strategy firms, the Accentures, the Big Four. We very rarely, we sometimes compete against other agencies as well. But I was shocked about this. I was thinking for, basically a small consulting team, we would be struggling on that, but we don't. We do that. And I suppose this is the point, is that the clients we work with and the brand that we have as WPP and Wunderman Thompson are the big brands, and that's who we deal with. So, our account teams, the work we already do, whether it's around content, advertising, e-commerce, data, whatever, it's all for these big brands. And so, yeah, we can compete. And I think that's amazing. But I think you're right with saying, I would never underestimate some of these players who are investing in creativity. My question would be whether creativity is truly in their heart, right? I mean,
that's the one you use in the pictures, I'm assuming.
That's how we try and win, because we are. But I would say I would never underestimate any formidable competitor that we come up against, like Accenture.
That takes me on to that point you just made there, because I know it was a little flippant, but it raises a really interesting question, and this might not have been something for you, but you talked about how, for you, it's been a great approach. You've got in, you've met all these creative people. You also mentioned your team is, let's, for simplicity say, a traditional consulting background. So, you mentioned strategy houses, Big Four. I'd just love to understand sort of actually, have you had to, and if so, what have you had to do to kind of, I guess, get colleagues comfortable with you and your team? Because I imagine it's quite an alien concept. I work in marketing as well. Creatives and consultants rarely come from the same perspective. Everything from the work they do to the fashion. I feel very unfashionable around many of my colleagues. Like my trouser legs are not rolled up, my sleeves fit me. These are things that, again, I'm probably horrifying listeners, but that's quite a shift. What did you have to do to kind of win hearts and minds?
And I'm glad you brought up dress sense, because that's one of the things I've been struggling with from day one. Whatever I wear, I'm never going to be dressed down enough for the environment that I'm in, and that has been, going from my background, a bit of a struggle. I think things have changed during COVID and the pandemic. I think things have generally become more relaxed in the offices generally these days, but yeah, just fitting in that sort of stuff. I find. I was talking to one of my good friends, who's also a marketing person, and she said, "Chris, it's not about what you wear. It's about your energy and joie de vivre, in terms of what you bring and your curiosity." And I think that's how you connect. You're probably going to look very. There's some people that walk around and think, "Gosh, I've never seen people like that at EY, but that is the culture, and it's less about how you look and whatever. It's more about your curiosity, your energy, and your, just sense of well-being as being part of it. And I find that it's a very positive culture as well, because the very nature of what we do, it's a positive culture. So if you're not positive, you won't get on there. But yeah, I it's interesting, the dress sense. I struggle with that every day, and I always go through some agony before I go out. What t-shirt do I wear, or what jeans should I wear, and things like that. But
well, I think you're dressed very well. But
thank you very much.
I feel we're from the same mold, so I don't know if that's helpful for your colleagues. But I think to what you may have answered it there, Chris. But I'm interested to ask: have there been times, or have you had to do anything almost to dispel myths or almost prejudices against you? Because someone says, right, you're going to meet with Chris. He was a former Big Four senior partner. There's a lot of perception tied up in that. Actually, and again, I ask this for anyone thinking of making a similar move, because I know of others who have or are moving to start similar businesses in similar spaces. Actually, what have you kind of consciously done or had to think about to make those people accept you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about that a lot as well, actually. And I think first thing is, I think you have to be quite humble in these situations. If you go in there, I'm the big senior partner, honestly, I think that's the worst thing you could do. So I'm the guy that's, the sage, experienced guys in the corner. People ask me for opinions and I give that and whatever. I've tried not to be controlling, so we've got a bright team, people that were there before me and actually doing pretty well. So probably the last thing they need is somebody to come in and tell them how to do things differently. So I try to adopt an approach that is, I give my opinion, and we're quite collaborative actually how we operate. It's not a command control thing. So there's a group of us that the more senior people in the team, we speak openly and have a very collaborative decision making process. But ultimately, I try and bring a bit of humility to it. I regard myself as one of them, which is what I am. I'm not above them or whatever. I'm one of them, and I think that kind of makes it fun. I think you've got to have that kind of sense of fun, and I mentioned a little bit of sense of humor to things at times. But honestly, I think that's just in your makeup. I can see some people that I've known throughout my career where what I'm doing now wouldn't work, right? And I say that with all honesty. But for me, I've never had a problem with working with people at a different level, whatever. And this is the same. I think that's great. And actually, I find we're quite an open culture as well. I don't feel, we're a very hierarchical culture. I think the culture in the agency is quite loose and quite flat. So I quite enjoy that as well. Yeah. But for me personally, try to summarize, it's sense of fun, it's being humble, and it's being collaborative. If I give those three words fitting in.
No, I think it's a good point. And I mean, a lot of it comes back to what you said about the Middle East is ultimately, whether it's regions, whether it's organizations, if you go in with a positive approach and an open mind, you can usually find some common ground with anyone. On the dress sense, after this, I will point you to some vintage shops my colleagues say are good. I've not been, but I hear they have good stuff that maybe you can take to blend in next year. And I guess my last question on this, Chris, I'm conscious we're kind of nearing our lunch booking, which for us is really important, but does draw close to our interview. For this, looking ahead to 2023, what is the plan for Wunderman Thompson Consulting? What is your ambition? And, if we were to do this again in a year, what are you hoping you'd be talking about?
Well, I'm actually, strange enough, conversely, because, at the moment it's all talk about recession and obviously the terrible war in Ukraine and energy crisis and strikes in the public sector, so it's not a great background, inflation, it's not a great backdrop from a business perspective at the moment. But honestly, for us, we are doing really well. We've got a good order book. We're trying to hire people as quickly as we can, albeit trying to find the right people for the size of team is really, really important. But we're finding people. And so for me, I look very optimistically at next year, actually. I think we've got a lot of unexplored potential. And that's the great thing about a smaller team, where you have all these clients in the agency that you could go after. But of course, we've got a limited capacity to serve all of them. So if we get bigger, well, it takes you to the conclusion that we could grow quickly as well. So I look really optimistically next year from our position. I think we've got some great people, great team. We need more people. We need to broaden our capabilities in some areas. I think we need to broaden our customer CX team in the UK. I think we need to broaden our tech team in the UK. I think we need more people from strategy and Big Four consulting backgrounds to join us. But honestly, I say that with complete candor. I think next year could be a great year for us, and long may that continue.
Amazing. We're really pleased to hear, Chris. So two questions really, and then I'll ask for your details for anyone who is thinking of moving jobs, has been sold on what you've said. We'll save that for the end so they can get in touch. But the last two questions then, these are things I ask all of my guests, it's worth saying. The first one is about books, and I'll let you take it if books aren't your thing. But what is the book or books that have either had the biggest impact on you or you've given to the most people, and why?
Gosh, books. I must admit, I'm not a big book person, actually. I tend to get my information other ways. But I'm going to link this back to chess, actually. So the book I would give most out is, and it's been in the news lately because of, unfortunately, cheating aspects in chess, but there was a brilliant book in the 1970s written by William Hartston, who's a former British champion. It's called How to Cheat at Chess. It's a humorous thing, but I always give that because it gives a connection to chess. People think, oh, it's a very highbrow, intellectual game and whatever. But actually, there's a fun side to it as well. So if I get organized, it's not, you can't buy a copy now just by going on Amazon. You have to get it's out of publication, but you can get copies. I try and give people copies on that, which usually raise a wry smile. But yeah, that's probably my contribution. I think of the chess books throughout my career that I've written. But business-wise, honestly, I get information in different ways, either through talking to people, reading articles, stuff like that. I'm not a big reader of big business books, strangely enough. I don't know, perhaps I'm an exception on that, but I just don't.
No, I'm increasingly finding you're not the exception. It's why I caveat, and at some point I might even change this question. I've had a number of guests so I do like to read, but I've had a number of guests who say, actually, Nick, varying degrees of I don't to I've never read a book. And I've had everything from YouTubes to podcasts to, like yourself, articles. I'm going to go for a second bite in terms of, and stop me if there isn't one, but is there a publication or something you go to that isn't books that you find valuable or really helps you?
Yeah, honestly, I love in business anyway, I love the kind of Harvard Business Review articles and I think it's just good quality research.
My next question, and really the last question for today, and this is a chance for you to give advice. And this could be a roundup, it could be something new, but you have three people in front of you. You've got one who's an analyst, or we use sort of EY, KPMG parlance, an analyst graduate just coming in. You've got one who's a manager grade, let's say, and you've got one who is approaching partnership. So they'll be on that sort of partner track at a director level. And the question's quite simply, what one piece of advice would you give to each?
Yeah, that's a great question, or three great questions, actually, in many ways. But look, I think as a rank and file consultant, what the best thing to do there is learn. You get thrown out different clients, different engagements. You'll get all sorts of training and development. It's time of learning, really. And for me, that's what I did. And I think that still holds true today. Just going through that process of learning your trade as a consultant, with all that entails. I even remember when I joined KPMG all those years ago now, I still remember now some of the training that I did at those days. Things like how to conduct interviews, how to do problem solving, how to write a report, how to give a presentation. I'm not saying I excel on all of those things, but I learned something from those. And I still even think of those things today. And that was all at that stage of your formative years as a consultant. There's so much you can learn about just being a consultant. I always remember one thing that was told to me in one of those courses. They said, and I'm not sure whether this holds true today, actually. I think consulting is a bit more technical than it was then, back in 1985, 86. But one of the things that came into, they always said, well, think of consulting as 80% about people skills and 20% technical. I'm not sure that is true today, because I think there are some specializations that are more technical. I mean, certainly in technology consultant, you need a certain level of knowledge to be able to, to be productive in that area. But I still think the people side and the softer skills are just so important. And I think as a consultant coming up at that level, that's an important learning curve. I think when you mentioned getting to manager, I think some of these things probably apply today. I do think actually there's probably been a bit of grade inflation as well. Some of the things that I see senior managers do these days, I used to do as a manager. So I think there's been a bit of a change that goes on, right? But I think when you get to that stage, one of the things that you start thinking about is consulting as a business. So instead of purely doing engagements and delivery, you're suddenly thinking about, writing proposals, or doing some marketing, or managing a team of people, or managing a client relationship. So I think at that stage, it is moving away from being purely a delivery consultant to learning the knowledge of consulting as a business. And some people make that translation, make that jump, and some people don't. I find it's probably the first cut-off point for many people, in that some people say, well, all I want to do is client work. All I want to do is deliver. All I want to be is the best architect in this particular area of technology, right? And that's fine. There's a career path for those. But for the majority who are wanting to get on to the next stage, it's learning about the consulting business. And actually, for me, that was one of the most interesting parts. Suddenly that it wasn't just all about delivery, but there was a whole bunch of things in consulting that you could do beyond that. And I found that really, really interesting. I think then the final question was about becoming a partner. And I think this is probably one of the most pivotal points in somebody's career. I mean, even today, I think it's so important for people. And I mentioned earlier on, where I was, time and place when I got the call, and, what I felt like after that. And it opens up a whole new career path for people. I mean, you don't realize, of course, that when you make partner, there's a whole hierarchy of partners after that. And there is no such thing as everybody being equal as a partner, even though in theory that is true. But, I think at that stage so this is probably somebody at a director level, probably been a director a couple of years or something like that. Typically, you're going to be a partner some time out. It's not one of those things that, Nick, next week you're going to be a partner. You know this probably from 2 to 3 years beforehand, because there's a process of development centers, panels, interviews, business case that you'll be primed for. So that anybody who's thinking they're going to be a partner, they're probably going through that process 2 or 3 years before. It's also a point though where you're most valuable in the industry, because you know what it's like to be a consultant. You've proved yourself in terms of developing business and delivering work and all those things that I mentioned earlier on. So you're actually quite attractive as an employment proposition at that point. And I remember myself, I shouldn't say this, but when I was going through the process at KPMG, I got approached by other consulting firms or banks, and my head was turned because they were typically offering me quite a lot of money and whatever. But I decided to stay because I thought it was important to me to be a partner. And I thought if I could make it, then that would project me to other things. And I think that was probably right, actually. But it is a point where your head does get turned by other offers at that point. And actually, even once you've made partner, probably in the first couple of years, that's a point as well where people do get their heads turned a little bit. But my advice for people at that stage is stick with it. You've worked hard to get to that position. One piece of advice is I'm not sure I like this term, but it was like, keep your nose clean at that. And I think that what they were trying to saying is, in your final year, don't go gung-ho, try and, because at the end of the day, people don't want loose cannons to be partners. They want people that they know are going to deliver repeatable income over a number of years and sustain the business and so on. And so, your final year is quite important. You're locked in at that stage. You all you need to do is deliver on your clients or your revenue, and things will follow typically. But some people, think they need to super excel at that point, and often that's where people can get into to trouble. Yeah, sorry, a bit of a long-winded description there, but those things are quite close to my heart because I've been through each of those journeys myself, and I can relate to lessons that I've learned and other people as well that have been through that and seen the good and the not so good.
Well, I think some great advice there, Chris. And I think a lot of that advice, and to your point, that journey and what you've learned, we've talked about today, which has been brilliant. And thank you for making the time. Thank you for taking the time and coming here on what is only a few days before Christmas, because you may be much more organized than me, but I know I've got Christmas shopping left to do, and you may well as well. So the last question for today, and this is really, I said we'd come back to it, for anyone who wants to find out more about yourself, about opportunities at Wunderman Thompson, is interested to talk or hear more, where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
I'm probably the easiest thing, Nick. And by the way, thanks for today. And I've really enjoyed the discussion. It's been a trip down memory lane in many ways for me. You don't do that very often. But if people want to get in touch, my profile on LinkedIn is there. It's got all my contact details. So yeah, feel free to ping me a message, and happy to connect with you. But thanks very much indeed.
Amazing. We'll put that in the show notes. And thank you, Chris. And I've really enjoyed it. So all that's left to say is have a great Christmas and all the best for the new year.
Very good. Thanks.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.